So this video is going to be a little bit different. I am interested in creating painting tutorials, but I don't feel like my skill set has developed enough to confidently do a full-on painting tutorial. So what I thought I would do is I would document my progress as I kind of grow and learn, and hopefully I can teach you things along the way. Maybe you can teach me, or maybe we can just share in this journey together. What I'm going to be painting for these videos is this miniature here. I acquired this in an eBay lot. There was like 150 minis. This was just one of them. So I don't know the background of the miniature. I don't know. I have a guess at the manufacturer, but I don't know for certain. And I have a player in my current game that needs a miniature, and this miniature kind of fits the overall feel and vibe of his character. I will be painting this at a higher level just because it is a higher quality miniature. It's much better than WizKids or any of the cheaper Reaper miniatures. This, I think, is one of the metal sculpts from Balloons Black. He looks like he could be a cleric, but he also looks like he could be a fighter or a paladin as well. So I'll bring you along the way, show you. It'll probably be a few different videos to document the entire process. One video start to finish would be way too much. It'd be a long video. You don't want to watch that. I don't want it destroying my YouTube analytics. We'll break it up, do a few videos, and makes it a little easier for you to go back to certain points to figure out aspects that I might have been doing. Enjoy the video and let me know in the comments if you've learned anything from my goofy process. We'll go ahead and start prepping this miniature. Because this came from a wholesale lot, the person I bought it off of had already done most of the prep work. All that was really left was some mold lines that he missed and a few other small things. Now, this was painted and based when I got it. I was not particularly fond of the paint job, so I stripped the paint off and I removed all the basing material. In that process, the glue that attached the arms became brittle, so I just pulled the arms right off. So I'm going to go ahead and get those glued back on. Now, I have already pre-drilled the holes for the pins that are in the arms. Now, I will say I am by no means an expert when it comes to gluing. It's probably my least favorite part of the whole process. I managed to get by, but it is pretty common for me to end a gluing session with parts and random bits glued to my hands. And here, as an example, you can see I'm trying to glue the shield onto the wrong side of the body. So his arm's upside down, the shield's upside down, and I look like a complete tool here. Though probably not as much of a tool as he would look if he had upside down arms. So it takes me actually 3 attempts, and I'm sorry, I know this looks pretty pathetic. I do get him. After, I believe, the second time, I put a little too much pressure when I'm gluing the shield on, and both arms end up flying onto the floor. You'll notice here that I'm holding the parts on. I typically don't like using accelerators for a couple of reasons. One, I have very sensitive sinuses, so any noxious odors tend to cause a lot of problems for me. And last time I tried using an accelerator, I couldn't go in the room for about a day or two. The other part of it is, it's one thing for me to choose what I'm breathing in, but I live with other people, I have pets, and it's really not fair for me to make health decisions for those people. I try to stay away from anything that is toxic or gives off a high amount of VOCs. Now, I know you could argue that most things, especially in the hobby industry, give off some level of VOCs, but not all of those things are on equal footing by any means. One thing I will do when I'm using super glue is I will use a substrate like baking soda in the glue. And what this does is it will help it dry a little faster. But I think what is more effective about it is the fact that it gives you a very strong bond and it will fill gaps. I didn't really see the need to do that here. I mean, you might be able to argue because it's a metal miniature, it might be the better way to go, but I didn't really find it necessary. Baking soda is not the only thing you can use. You'll see a lot of tutorials out there talking about using baking soda, but it's really any substrate that you can add into the glue that will just cause it to bond better and have a stronger tensile strength. So these miniature handles that I'm using are 3D printed. The nice thing about this system is there are multiple caps and cap sizes that you can print for it, and it's just a typical bottle cap size. But it's nice because I can prep a bunch of miniatures and then just unscrew one, screw the other one on, and I'm ready to start a new project or switch between projects. If anyone would like a tutorial or a video about recommendations on some useful 3D prints for miniature paintings, let me know and I can definitely put a video together on that. I am actually in the process of designing my own version of this miniature holder, but we'll see how that goes before I mention any more about that. After I've glued everything and I've got a decent bond, I'm going to go ahead and clear up the excess glue. Just make sure I don't have anything blocking any details or kind of filling in the details. You know, it's okay if you spread the glue out and it kind of coats the surface. You might have a little bit of roughness there afterwards, but you can always sand that off if you need to. A lot of times, depending on the texture of the material you're painting, so for instance, if I'm painting metal or I'm painting leather or skin, those different surfaces or materials interact with light in different ways. So you might not notice the glue if it's, say, on a leather boot, but you would probably notice it if it's on a piece of armor or like a plate of armor. That's something important when you're painting to remember, is that surfaces or materials interact with light in different ways. And you kind of have two ends of the spectrum. So you have something like a metal, because it has a dense surface and that surface is reflective and relatively smooth. Light doesn't really absorb or penetrate into it. What happens is, even on a dark metal color, it tends to reflect light back. So think of like a black car in the sun, it's always going to reflect light back unless you use like a highly matte paint. Again, it's just because light isn't penetrating that material, it's just bouncing off and reflecting back. The other side of the spectrum is a material like skin, where you have something called subsurface scattering. And essentially what happens is the light is penetrating the material and then bouncing around inside before it reflects back out. That's what gives you that like semi-translucent look in when your skin's in intense lighting. I did find a mold line that was still on the boot, and I'm just going to take my file to it. The boot is going to be a relatively rough surface, so I'm not too worried about how smooth this is. I will sand it a little bit after. You don't really have to go too intense with that. And then I'll just go around the model, make sure I don't have any issues. And as you can see in the hair here, whoever painted this originally did go a little too intense with the filing, and they filed the mold line right down, so now that there's kind of a smooth surface in the hair. When you are removing mold lines, be careful of textures. I'm gonna cut this sanding stick that has gotten a little rough. It's not sanding quite well. I went for my good knife at first, but then I opted to grab my cheaper hobby knife. Now this is something important to think about. I get the decision to make purchases on a budget. You know, sometimes we just need to. But one place I will say you almost never ever want to buy something on a budget is when you're buying any type of cutting tool. And the reason is, these are the tools that are going to be more likely to injure you in some way. You always want to make sure you have a good sharp knife and the blade is nice and secure, and you know the tool itself is rigid enough where it's not going to snap on you, but you don't want it to be brittle. You know, you just want to make sure you have a good quality tool for cutting. I decided to use this cheap knife, and you can see the blade is twisting side to side as I tried to cut it, and it kept on slipping back in the tightening mechanism. And I saw a disaster coming because, yeah, it'd be one thing if I accidentally stabbed myself with a sharp blade. It probably wouldn't do that much damage. You know, it might create a deep puncture, but it's not going to get that bloody normally. There are obviously exceptions to that. If, let's say, that blade broke and now I have a blunt piece of metal that's still thin enough to puncture your skin, but it's going to be more of a blunt puncture, you're going to hemorrhage more, you're going to injure yourself a lot worse. Always try to use good cutting tools. As silly as this sounds, I do plan on making a video specifically about why you shouldn't use cheap hobby knives. So I'm going to go ahead and opt for a pair of scissors. You can see as I swing around here, I have quite a few tool and paint racks. They all integrate within each other. You can hang any one of the different organizing accessories for it onto any of the racks. It's actually a system I 3D printed. If that's something that you would like to see a video about, let me know in the comments. I thought about it, but I don't know how much interest there would be on that setup. It is incredibly useful though. I'll go ahead and sand that down now that I have the sanding stick cut to size. And again, I'm not going overboard with it. I'm just getting it so you're not going to notice where I filed it down. And that's it. We've got our miniature ready to prime. Now you'll notice I turn on the lights for my spray booth with my phone. Almost everything in my studio area is controllable through a centralized system, so I can access everything on my phone. It's an IoT system. It's, you know, they're all smart lights, smart plugs, stuff like that. What's nice is it just gives me control. I can hit a button, everything's up and running. I can just get to work. It removes a barrier to entry. When I prime, I like to use what's called a zenithal prime, and the concept there is when the sun is at its zenith and it's pointing, well, it is pointing straight down because it's at its zenith, it's at the highest point in the sky. The top of an object is going to be brighter than the undersurfaces. What a zenithal highlight is we are going to paint the miniature in a dark gray or a black or any other dark color. Then we are going to take white or another light color and we are going to spray it from the direction of the light source. So zenithal essentially would be top down. There are variations on that, like the strictest definition of zenithal would be high noon. So, you know, the very top of the surfaces would be getting white primer. The method itself is more forgiving than that. You can really use any angle. And what I usually do is I do a 3-point or a 3-tone zenithal. I'll paint the whole miniature in my darkest gray primer. Then I'll go at about a 30 degree to 45. Essentially, I just want to leave that darkest gray in the deepest recesses or where the deepest shadows are going to be. And that way I have definition of volume all the way around the model. And the reason why we want that volume is because it's going to sell the model more. We're trying to make it look like it's a life-size object. And if you think of like how large a human is versus how large this miniature is, the shadows when the light falls on the miniature are never going to sell it to your brain. But if we paint in the shadows the way they would fall on us at our full size, then it helps sell the paint job much more. It helps with contrast, and these are things that like a canvas, oil on canvas painter would think about as well. After I do my darker gray and then my lighter gray, I'll hit it with a white primer, and I'll usually do 1 to 2 angles with that. You really want to concentrate where that light source is coming from, and that will again push the highlights or the brightest parts of the model so that you really get a full rounded volume where you have your brightest sections or brightest parts facing towards your light source and your darkest parts away from the light source. So when we're priming, you'll notice that I'm moving the model constantly, and I'm not just spraying from one point. I'm kind of moving my hand, kind of dusting it back and forth. That's just so I don't get any buildup in one section, and I'll keep moving it around until I've covered the whole thing. The other thing that you want to take note of is when you're airbrushing, especially if you have a dual action airbrush. Dual action is when you press down, you get air. When you pull back, you get paint. A lot of times people will just take their finger off when they want to stop applying paint. What will happen is your air shuts off first and then the paint shuts off after, and you get essentially a little paint drip out the nozzle, and then it dries on the tip. Or when you go to spray again, you get a splatter. What we want to do when we're using the airbrush is we want to shut off the paint first. So you're sliding your finger forward and then you're pulling your finger up to turn off the air. And what that's going to do is that's going to make sure that when that little bit of paint comes out, it's still going to get sprayed off the tip before it can dry or ruin your paint job with splattering. I would love to give you a exact recipe for how to thin your paints for the airbrush, but the paint consistency, it's one of those things that you really need to get a feel for. One of the things I like to do is I will just print out their airbrushing exercises that have little dots and lines and boxes you have to fill in with the airbrush. If you print those out and just practice with different air pressures and paint consistencies, I think that's going to be much better than you taking paint thinning advice from me on how to properly airbrush. Even in the same paint line, it's going to be different from color to color, batch to batch. It's all over the place. You know, the thinner you're using is going to affect it. How much air pressure you're using in your brush is going to affect it. The way I like to clean between colors or tones is I like to use a spray bottle, and I'll just go ahead and purge all the paint by spraying directly into the cup over my jar here. I'll backfill a little bit. Now, I wouldn't recommend backfilling because you can ruin your brush. It's a bad habit I've picked up, but essentially you want to flush out all that paint. It's so much easier to just take one of those professional grade spray bottles, spray out the cup over something, spray out the paint from the tip, fill the cup of water again, and repeat that process until it's coming out pretty clear. And then I'll use an airbrush cleaner. You can use a solvent for that as well. It just helps remove any paint that might be dried up inside there. But after I use the solvent, I always put water through the brush, and that's so I don't have anything caustic sitting in the nozzle, or when I go to put a new color in, it's not going to splat a bunch of airbrush cleaner onto my model and strip any paint off. I'll go ahead and change to my lighter gray here. I kind of got a little too impatient and I didn't let the model dry completely. And part of that's because I did overspray a couple areas. Usually when you time it right and you're using the correct amount and the correct thinness, it will dry pretty quick and you shouldn't have a lot of downtime between changes, but occasionally you might. I'm just going to go ahead and air dry the model by spraying it with just air. Now you see me spraying right now, but I'm not using any paint. I'm just blowing air through that nozzle. Another thing I want to mention is I like to spray the paint when I put a new color in onto my glove, and that's to test the consistency. And that's part of getting a feel for it, is you'll know by the way it's coming out on your glove how it's going to come out on the model. And that'll save you, really, it's just paint, so you're not going to ruin anything by spraying the wrong consistency on there, but it'll just save you some time. Once I've got everything dried up, I'll go ahead and hit this at that 45-degree angle that I mentioned. You might see a little bit of the detail popping out as I do this. It'll be much more noticeable once we get the white primer on there. Again, cleaning the brush, same exact way. One thing I will use if I notice that paint is building up anywhere, I will use the Q-tip with a little bit of the solvent or cleaner on there. So now with the white, you'll notice that I'm not putting a lot of paint in that cup, and I'm probably not even going to use what I did put in there. It's because we really do not need much to get the effect we're looking for. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start spraying it head on at the front of the model. And this is going to be all at the same rough angle. I'm not gonna go too intense with it here, but when I get into the true light source, which is gonna be face on, you can see this character is looking over one of its shoulders in a defensive stance. I'm gonna spray it so that the face is getting the most light. And that's just, we always want to try to sell our faces the most. That's where we want to try and invest most of our time. Faces, hands, weapons, anything that you want to bring the viewer's attention to, that's usually where you want to target your light. That'll vary too, depending on the type of paint job you're doing or what story you're trying to tell with the miniature. The final time I go through and clean, it's really not that much different. Again, the only difference is I'll use a Q-tip, clean inside and out, just so I don't get any buildup. And then I will, with a little bit of the cleaner on there, I will actually take the Q-tip, spin it around the tip to clean off any paint that's built up on that tip over time. You can get what's called dry tip, and that's just from paint drying on the tip, just as it sounds. And what that'll do is it'll either cause your brush to splay when you spray with it, so it'll spray out instead of at what you're trying to paint, or you'll get some sputtering and spluttering, which both, or I should say all three of those things, are not really great for the final product. And you can cover it up. It's not that big of a deal, but if you're trying to get your best paint job possible, we want to try to make sure we keep a nice clean airbrush. And here we are. We have our primed miniature. You can see that the Zenithal highlight has really helped pick out the details. You can see volumes now, and it looks like we have a realistic representation of light on our model. One thing I am going to do is I'm going to go around the entire model and just make sure I didn't accidentally spray some hair on there or any other debris. I'll also look over to see if there's anything that I need to fix up that I missed in the prep. Now's a good time to do all that, but really we can fix things at any point in this process. So never worry that you missed something, because once you find it, you can always fix it. It's really not that much work to do later on. It is an extra step, but it's not the end of the world. I do a lot of live video production, and one of the things we say that I think applies for miniature painting as well is with live production, there's no such thing as a perfect production, just perfect mitigation. So you're always going to have problems. It's just learning how to deal with the problems when they arise. I'm noticing here on the shield arm, there is quite a gap between the arm and the hand when I glued it on. It's not a big deal. I actually am going to use a method I learned from watching Vince Ventrella's videos. If you don't know who that is, which let's face it, if you're at my channel, there's a good chance you probably know who that is, because he's one of the most prolific painting tutorial creators out there. What he does is he'll use varnish on any mold lines or gaps that he finds later in the process, and it just helps kind of blend those out. I'm going to grab the varnish here. Again, I'm going to just make sure it's nice and mixed. We want to make sure we are putting a consistent product on the miniature. I like to use a vortex mixer when I'm mixing my paints. Not only does it mix paints incredibly fast, and you get almost a perfect consistency, they are much better than those nail polish mixers. To be honest, the price difference now, it's not even justifiable to get a nail polish mixer. Just get yourself one of these vortex mixers. I've saved a lot of my paint bottles with this. And I'm using a satin varnish just to give us a nice smooth surface. That'll help hide things a little more, but it'll also help any additional layers of varnish I put on there to fill a gap flow better into those gaps. And that's because of its smooth surface. I'll first fill in the gap on the arm, and then after I fill in the gap on the arm, I'll let that set for a little bit. I accidentally painted a hair in when I was airbrushing, so I just pull it off with a pair of tweezers. It can be a little tricky to get in there and grab it. You know, it's like taking a sliver out. It's hard to see exactly where it is, but use tweezers. Don't try to use your fingers because you could scratch the model or you'll probably struggle with precision on it. Once you get used to using tweezers, it does make things a lot easier. And I'm noticing on the boot that we still have a little bit of that mold line showing. It's not much, so this would be perfect time to use the varnish. So I'm just gonna dab some on, and when I do, it's gonna glob up a bit. That's okay. We're just gonna use a damp brush, and we're gonna pull off any excess with the brush. We don't want a sopping brush, just a damp brush. When we put it in that varnish, it's gonna pull it up the bristles because you have a wet thing that's gonna wick towards the dry area, the process of absorption. And we're just going to keep doing that until it's the amount of varnish we want on the surface. Even though this is not a great brush, I'm still going to make sure I clean it. And you'll notice that I clean it in between each use. And when I say use, I don't mean just each time I use it in a session. I mean, every time I put paint on that brush, before I put more paint on that brush, I'm going to rinse it off in the water. And what that does is it makes sure I don't have anything that dries in the bristles. Now, obviously, there will be probably a little bit of something in there, so I want to do a good cleaning job at the end. But as soon as you dip your brush in the paint and take it out, the drying process has begun. We're just trying to keep brushes out of the landfill. I'm a little bit more meticulous with my good brushes, but I do like to still take care of my lower quality, kind of what most people would call throwaway brushes. If one gets bad, I'll repurpose it in some way. I'll use the wooden dowel for something, the bristles for something else, or it could be a gluing brush. You know, there are definitely, you can repurpose these things. I always try to conserve as much as I can with the things I'm using, and I'm not always perfect. I'm sure as I make videos, you'll catch things. If you ever find something that I could be more efficient with, please let me know. And that is it. Our model is ready to paint, and we'll be able to build out those volumes better, really get the contrast to pop it. We're already at a great start. I will add some close-up, clearer pictures at the end. If you found this helpful at all, or you have any recommendations or any suggestions, or feel like I could have done something better, feel free to leave me a comment. As long as it's respectful, I'm happy to have a good conversation about any of those things. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.